Good morning and welcome to City and State's State Legislative Forum on Utilities and the COVID Recovery. I'm Zach Williams, Senior State Politics Reporter at City and State. Thanks so much for joining us. We've got a great event with state legislators discussing some really big issues affecting New Yorkers across the state. So much going on with the pandemic and more, but we only got an hour, so let's get right down to it. We're really focusing today on the rising costs of energy, utilities, with $1.7 billion in outstanding arrears right now. So we're going to talk to members of the State Assembly and State Senate. Right now, we got members of the lower chamber here. Others are going to come in as we go. And we only got an hour, like I said, for this discussion. So throw in any questions you got into the chat feature at the bottom of your screen, and we'll try to work them into the conversation as we go. So let's get right down to it. I'll just introduce some of the members of our panel and just give a wave when I say your name. So we got newly elected Assembly Member Yudelka Tapia. We also got Assembly Member Robert Carroll. And of course, we got Assembly Member Zohran Mamdani. And then batting cleanup for now, we got Bill Ferris, Senior Legislative Representative at the AARP New York. So let's jump right into it. Right in my introduction, I was mentioning this $1.7 billion. And of course, we're going to have David McNally at the end wrapping things up. I don't want to forget him, of course, but we're going to save him for later. So just jumping right in, we got $1.7 billion in outstanding arrears from the pandemic. Among the many disruptions it caused was causing people to being unable to pay their utility bills. What are we going to do about it in this state budget process? Who on our panel wants to take that up as our first question? Oh, was that a yes, Assemblymember Carroll? What do you kind of see right now with the current situation with utility arrears, and what do you think can be done about it?
Sure, Zach. Good morning, everyone. It's wonderful to be here. There are a few concrete things that we could do right now in the state budget to help New Yorkers who are in arrears because of utility companies' completely unacceptable increase in rates in the month of January. We have about $1.25 billion in federal monies that we could use to help needy New Yorkers pay down these arrears. And I think it's really important that in the budget that we're going to pass on April 1st, we make sure that we dedicate certain funds in that budget to help New Yorkers who are struggling with paying those bills. But this is a structural problem. We need to do legislation in New York to make sure that this doesn't happen again. We deregulated our energy markets back in 1998 under the Tapia administration. We need to re-regulate those markets. This is what happens when we create a system of shareholder-owned utilities, that you must buy their product, but they get to reap massive profits. The problem is these folks at Con Edison, simply put, are incompetent. They knew that this was coming. They did not properly hedge the energy market. That's why your bill increased by 60%, because they didn't go out and purchase futures of energy appropriately. And that is one of the major reasons your bill increased. We need to re-regulate this market. We need to come out with a way that we sell wholesale to New Yorkers their energy. Energy is a necessity. It should not be to the whims of the free market. We need to re-regulate these markets. They were regulated for decades and decades. And it's only recently that they were deregulated. Let's re-regulate them. But for the time being, for all those folks who are in arrears, let's get you the funds necessary to get you out from under that debt. And then let's do the hard work to figure out how we make sure this doesn't happen again.
I'm seeing some finger snaps from your colleagues in the Assembly. Who wants to jump in? Maybe the freshman Democrat, Assemblymember Tapia. What do you say?
Yes, I completely agree with my colleague in that we are just tired of these mean-tested solutions, temporary solutions that actually are not going to solve the issues, but temporarily. We had to actually do legislation that actually is going to end with that uncapping what is the amount that these companies, because I mean, these companies has made so much money over the pandemic on our backs. And 80% of the constituents that are visiting my office right now are coming with the issues of not being able to pay the electricity and being afraid that it's going to be cut off because they have somebody, that has issues in the house, and they are scared that they're going to lose the electricity. And never mind the fact that the electricity is high because they are putting it out. My electricity jumped like 300% in my apartment. But also remember, landlords are now giving proper heat, so people have to be using electric heaters. In their apartment that is actually putting that. There is an array of issues that actually are in the middle of this crisis that we have, that this pandemic has bring up, that we know that we had it always, but now is when we're looking at it, because there are so many families, so millions of families, 1.3 million families in New York State are now, owe electricity, and they are just the brink of being disconnected. And imagine what will happen. And it's true, we're going to push, we're talking about $500 million, but we don't know. $500 million is not going to be enough if we do that, but it's going to be temporary. What's going to happen when another pandemic happens? What's going to happen when another emergency happens? I think, that as a legislator, I think the state should do more. And these companies that are making gazillions, billions of dollars, they are making more money than before the pandemic they did. In 2021, they made $1.3 billion. That's outrageous. They should be paying right now for the $1.7 billion that our community owes. And I think, that everybody has to, and so we had to do actually being more serious at the state level and thinking how we're gonna legislate around this so this don't happen again.
Now, these are issues that are affecting New Yorkers across the state, but Bill, maybe you could tell me a little bit about, how this is affecting the people represented by the AARP. I hear a lot of our speakers already alluding to the moratorium on utility shutoffs. What is the potential impact on seniors in particular if nothing is done?
Well, as you know, being a representative of AARP, we're always concerned about the 50 plus in New York State. And some of the stats we have are that older persons use the same amount of energy as other people, but it consumes more of their household income. And with the arrears crisis, and we're actually calling it a crisis in the state of New York, we're seeing those households not able to afford their utility bill. I believe there's numbers that 1 in 5 households in the state of New York are behind 60 days behind on their utility bill. And that is a problem in New York. We can't move forward in New York if we have so many people in New York and these household budgets that are in debt. How are we supposed to move forward as a state as hopefully we get out of this COVID storm that we're in? So we fully support what the Assemblyman said and the Assemblywoman. We need to do something in the budget now to take care of the arrears problem. And then we need to move forward to, one, make sure it doesn't happen again, and build in programs. I know Senator Parker has a data matching bill. Why don't we use technology to hook people up to programs that they're eligible for? A lot of stuff doesn't make sense. There needs to be new policies. We need to engage the PSC in some of the cases that they have. The legislature has to get active, which we've heard here today, and we need to move forward. We can't have an arrears problem continue in the state of New York. And the budget is a huge step, but it shouldn't be the only step moving forward.
I just want to welcome State Senator Parker to the conversation. He chairs the Energy Committee in the upper chamber. It's so great that you could join us. We're talking about all the outstanding arrears right now with utility costs. Obviously, you're very active on these issues. What do you think can be done to help New Yorkers catch up on these energy bills?
Well, first, let me say good morning, and let me say hello, particularly to my colleagues who are on the call today. Bobby and I share a district together, but we rarely see each other, so it's good to see Good to see him. He's looking younger by the day. I think he has a Benjamin Button type thing going on. And my new colleague, Assembly Member Tapia, who came to my event this week. Good to see you again as well. And all of you, is good to be part of this important conversation. As you know, I represent the 21st District in Brooklyn, which is Flatbush and East Flatbush, Midwood, Ditmans Park, Windsor Terrace, and Park Slope. And serve as both the majority whip and the chairman of the Energy and Telecommunications Committee. What you probably don't know is I actually represent more senior citizens than any other Senate district in the entire state of New York, right? And so these issues are near and dear to my heart. Have a lot of homeowners in particular who are dealing with this issue. And this is something that I saw, a long time ago. I mean, I was fortunate enough to have good partners in the Assembly who helped with not just one utility moratorium in the beginning of the pandemic, but we actually did two. We didn't just cover water, gas, and electric, but we also covered telephone, cable, and internet services as well. And so, when we look at arrears, the first problem that we frankly run into, Zach, is that there's nobody even tracking it, right? And so I have a data bill in which we force the Public Service Commission to actually track what arrears look like. Because right now, each one of the utility companies actually probably knows, I'm sure they know, but probably knows what their arrear numbers are, but they're not necessarily sharing those numbers in real time with the PSC. And so it's even as we talk about what the number is, we're really guesstimating because there's nobody actually tracking it. So we really need to pass some legislation in both houses and sign into law that actually requires the PSC to actually track it. My rough guess is that when you look at all 6 categories, water, gas, electric, telephone, cable, internet, that we're talking about close to $4 billion, right? But now that's the bad news. The good news is I believe that there's some federal dollars that was passed last summer that I think addresses some of these issues. And I certainly agree with you, and certainly there's been some conversations in both houses about addressing the issues of utility arrears, obviously, particularly with the rising cost of gas and other energy, home heating and transportation fuel costs going up so dramatically over the last 2 months. There's a lot of work that we really need to do. And I certainly, agree with Bill that we can't go into the future having our state, having, the most vulnerable members of our state be saddled with literally tens of thousands of dollars worth of arrears based on no fault of their own, but because of a pandemic that threatened both our lives and our livelihoods.
It's super interesting, Senator. The budget is coming up just a few weeks away. It's hard to believe. When I hear people talk about, utility arrears, I inevitably also compare it to everything that's gone on with rent. And, so much talk about, billions of dollars here and there, but, the scale of the problem is really hard to kind of wrap your head around. I was curious, Assemblymember Mamdani, what do you think of where things stand in the executive budget on issues of utility arrears and helping people with energy costs? And do you think that, the one house budget from the Assembly, for example, might rise to the scale of the problem, or is this going to take more than just the state budget?
I think that the one house from the Assembly, though we do not have a final print, will definitely rise to the occasion more than the governor's has. And, Assemblymember Tapia mentioned the scale of what's being discussed in terms of a utility arrears fund. But I think that it goes back to what Assemblymember Carroll was saying earlier, is that, it's all well and good to have an arrears fund, which we should have. But what good is the arrears fund if in 2 years another fund is required? We have to have a clear understanding from our side of the state that the factors which create debt are flourishing. They are not going away, and the creation of a fund will not address those key factors. Bobby was talking about these are structural issues, these are issues of regulation. I'm really happy to be on this call with him because he has a bill, which in kind of common language we speak about as public power. The specific language is the Build Public Renewables Act. And I think the importance of that bill is that it takes away the monopoly that a lot of these energy companies have over these markets. We cannot allow my constituents' ability to live in this neighborhood be at the whims of a company like Con Edison, which is fundamentally accountable to its shareholders. No one more than that. And the issue here is that we have in our state the ability to build out an alternative. We have a history of doing so in the New York Power Authority. What we need to do is authorize that authority to build, generate, and distribute renewable energy at the same or lower cost than Con Ed is doing right now. And what is so difficult is that, you know, our hearts are with those who are suffering in Ukraine at this time, and the ramifications of what's going on in that country is felt worldwide, not only at a moral level, but also in terms of what's going on in the gas markets. And the need to go away from Con Ed, the need to go away from these private companies, is coupled with the need to create an alternative to fossil fuels, especially fuels like gas, which are inherently volatile because of the fact of what's going on right now. We're dependent on what's going on elsewhere. In many ways, my constituents' bills here are tied to whether or not Vladimir Putin violates international law and kills people in a neighboring country. And that's ridiculous. The good thing is that we have the power to change that within the state. You know, we've been pushing on the executive to incorporate this bill into her vision for the budget, but we could also pass it as a legislature. And I'm really happy that Senator Parker is here because, as you said, he's the chairman of the Energy Committee, and that is one method where we can pass it. The other one we'd have to pass it is in the Assembly.
But also the Senate sponsor of the bill, along with and the person who actually drafted the bill, along with Assemblyman Carroll. So yeah.
So we got the dream team here of public renewables. You know, some that it seems like we're all grappling with right now is, you know, there's a big crisis. You can use them to do transformative change. You know, double down on renewable energy, solar panels everywhere, but that doesn't necessarily do much in the very, very short term. And we've seen, you know, with the president, where he's been trying to increase oil imports from other places, oil production, that sort of thing. It's, you know, how do we balance the need in the short term to lower prices by, for example, increasing supply with the long-term need to deal with the climate crisis? Anyone?
Well, so I mean, look, it has to start today, right? And that is where making sure the arrears fund is in today's budget or in this month's budget is imperative to ratepayers throughout the state to make sure that they're not saddled with, you know, $1 billion of arrears. But, you know, Assemblymember Mamdani is completely correct. Look, we have to start today, and we have to really, you know, put the full weight and force of the state of New York behind building out as much renewable energy as possible. And some of that's going to come online much quicker than folks realize, right? There are projects being built today that will come online in the next 5 to 8 years, which will make real meaningful differences in folks' bills. But the problem is that pipeline is still not broad enough. We need to do more in the next 5 to 8 years. And so, you know, it's our job to make sure that, you know, in the short term, we fix folks' utility issues and we make sure. And one of the things that we could do is, look, we could start the re-regulation process right now. You know, we've been working in the Assembly about an idea, it's a little bit of the heavens, is trying to cap kilowatt hours, the rate that you'd have to pay on the kilowatt hour, you know, to force Con Edison and other utilities to really hedge tremendously against mass fluctuation in the markets. You know, that is the problem. When you create a system, right? And right, nobody wants to talk about regulation, but when you create a regulatory system where all of us have to buy your product, but you get to reap massive rewards, you are not properly incentivized to actually go out and do the proper due diligence that you need to go do in the markets. You know, if we want real capitalism, well, then let's do some real capitalism, but we haven't. We've socialized all of the risk because all of us have to purchase their product, but we've allowed them to reap mass rewards. And that's why we got to re-regulate these folks. If we re-regulated them tomorrow, we could make sure these bills come down, and then we could build towards that renewable future that we could create a much more sustainable and also predictable market where we could know that our energy bills, what our energy bills are year over year.
But Zach, if I could jump in really quick here, and let me acknowledge my birthday twin and my colleague in government, Senator Shelley Mayer. And let me apologize to Assemblyman Mamdani, because I did not acknowledge when I first started acknowledging my colleagues. Please charge it to my head, not my heart. But I think he makes some very, very good points. But I think that first we have to kind of acknowledge where we are and why we're in this moment, and the fact that we haven't been blind to what we need to do. First, part of what has created this problem is the closing of Indian Point without any real plan for how we replace 20% of the power, not just in New York State, but 20% of the power in the region which Indian Point produced, right? And so that's been somewhat of a problem. We have not allowed, I mean, and I understand where people are with gas, but we have to understand gas is a bridge fuel. We've already taken some steps. It's not like we just woke up today and said, oh, we have a problem. You know, we started this almost 8-9 years ago when we started developing the CLCPA, right? So the Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act, the most audacious, the most bold, the most ambitious climate change legislation in the history of the United States, we passed right here in the state of New York. And we started the process of putting more clean energy assets online. That's really where the, both short-term and long-term, we need to turn the battleship in a bathtub and get our bureaucracy here in the state of New York to be able to get clean energy assets online, both from a distribution perspective and a transmission perspective, sooner than later. And that's been a really, really big problem. But in the meantime, I agree with my colleagues in which having an address in the context of the budget is going to be helpful. And let me just make a slight correction to Bobby. We're not talking about $1 billion worth of arrears. We're probably talking about over $3 billion worth of arrears. And we have to also just make sure that we look for the federal dollars that are already out there and apply those federal dollars to this. I've introduced a couple of bills this week that people should be aware of. One, essentially, and after conversations with AARP already, is that I've introduced a bill that actually would create a senior rate for utilities across the state of New York. And I'm hoping my colleagues will, co-sponsor that legislation and help me bring it across the finish line. I've done a similar bill that creates a veterans rate and asks the PSC to create a veterans rate amongst utilities. And I've also created a gas tax holiday, which I think will take a little bit of the edge, not enough, but a little bit of the edge off over the end of the year, while some of the geopolitical dynamics get played out. And as we think about how we come up with other alternatives. But the reality is we need more charging stations. We need more opportunities to incentivize low fuel standards and having more electric cars in fleets across the state of New York. We have to retrofit homes, and we have to teach people about how essentially about conservation, right? And how to use energy off peak. That's going to be a critical part of what we do, in addition to getting more energy assets, clean energy assets online. And the quicker we could do that, the lower prices will be. But right now, we just can't stop everything, because that's part of what's rising the cost of our energy.
Thanks so much, Senator. Thank you. And thank you, Senator Mayer, for joining us. You came in just at the right time, because I had an awesome question from the audience about utility arrears. I'm sure there's plenty of your constituents out in Westchester that need some relief as well. Someone asked, obviously there's electricity, there's water, but should telephone or broadband or cable be treated in the same way in terms of helping New Yorkers catch up on their utility bills? What do you think?
Well, let me start with the context. I think so many of these things are now essential elements of our society, and it should not be treated as add-ons, but should be absolutely regulated in a way that doesn't allow the free market and, frankly, the salaries of the highest people to dominate the discussion. And I have criticized the Public Service Commission for its failure to be an advocate for consumers, as opposed to sort of a bureaucracy which runs according to its own rules. And Senator Parker's had fantastic leadership in pushing them to a better direction. But arrears in Con Ed bills, arrears in cable, throughout COVID, we fought one by one these little battles with each of these companies to avoid people getting cut off their cable, which actually meant that their phone would lose service. These are exactly like heat, hot water, food. They have become essentials. And we have not built a structure to deal with arrears that I think is thoughtful and reflects the current time we're in. So I believe that, you know, we have to move away from this model of we have to beg the company for an individual arrears arrangement to a presumption that arrears will be forgiven or worked out, and not leave it to the individuals. And in fact, AARP has been quite in the leadership of saying, if we have these individual responses, it is not a way to fix the system. We have to have a systemic fix, and it will trickle down to the individual people who call our office in desperation, literally in desperation, over these potential cutoffs and arrears. So I think we got to switch the thing on its head, and we really need a much more aggressive regulatory structure.
So what's the pace of change that people want to see? I see, Bill, you're raising your hand. What are your thoughts? Oh, I think you're on mute, Bill.
Sorry.
There we go.
Senator Mayor, we agree that broadband at this point should be considered an essential service. I mean, especially with older persons at home, isolation was a major problem, and the internet keeps them connected to their families and loved ones. But Zach, you asked about what could be done right now, just in this moment. We think at minimum, there should be put on the table $1 billion to look at the arrears issue for the, to take care of that problem. Now we need the governor to come to the table. Right now, the governor did not have any arrears money in her budget to take care of this crisis. And we think that was unfortunate. She did a lot of good things in her budget, but to AARP, that was a big hole that we saw in her executive budget. So at minimum, $1 billion put on the table in the budget negotiations. We think right now that the PSC should reject the Con Ed rate hike. I mean, as we discussed, we have an arrears crisis in the state of New York. Con Ed came in with close to 18% delivery charge on gas and or on electric, and an 18% delivery charge on gas. It's throwing gas onto the fire. That should be rejected. And also there should be a policy in New York that when a utility comes in for a rate increase, we should look at how much money is on the table at the federal government. AARP saw a report and was that there's about $60 billion that the Department of Energy has. Why are we not trying to grab as much money from the federal government we can to first address some of the issues that the utilities say they have, infrastructure, build for the future, the electric grid. Let's use those federal dollars first, and then see how much we have, what we need to charge ratepayers. But as far as moving forward, a lot has to be done. I know the Senate is doing an investigation. I know Senator Parker, Senator Mayer are part of that, to look at what has happened in New York and what can we do in the future. So AARP we're looking forward to seeing that that investigation unfold and see what the results of that are as well. I think that will probably give us a lot of answers for the future as well.
Senator Mayer, maybe you could tell us a little bit more about the scope of this investigation.
Well, I think, as I recall, I think Senator Skoufis's committee is commencing an investigation. Like from on the ground for us legislators who deal with individual people, we need answers and we need them quicker. And, yes, I totally agree, Bill, with opposing the last rate hike, the latest rate hike increase. I think we do need to put money in for arrears in the budget. I'm hopeful that, we get down that path and that we, as you say, we get the governor to agree that we actually need a fund to help people with these arrears now. And I hope in the investigation, in the letter that the Public Service Commission and the governor sent to Con Ed and the other utilities, they basically acknowledged that the hedging was severely inadequate and resulted in part of this. And, frankly, that was a little late to the table for after we all complained, and Senator Parker took the lead in our House in complaining about the implications. Then they decided the hedging was wrong. Well, it's on them to ensure that the hedging is right and our consumers don't pay the price. So I think there's a number of aspects that were determined through this latest rate incident that require much deeper investigation and pushback against the companies.
Jump right in, Assembly members.
Well, Zach, one of the things that we've forgotten here when we're talking about the rate cases, when we're talking about the PSC, is the governor loves to say that a new day has dawned in Albany. Well, if it has, she has the authority. She appoints the head of the PSC. She controls the little bit of regulatory framework that we have left in the state to regulate these utilities, and she should do that. She should put her money where her mouth is. And I'll be honest, I have not seen a great change since between the Cuomo administration and the Hochul administration when we're talking about keeping Con Ed's feet to the fire. It's ridiculous that they're looking for yet again another rate increase. It's ridiculous, as Senator Myers said, that they did not properly hedge the energy market. It's ridiculous that they knew that these increases were coming and they decided not to tell anyone. They decided that it was not necessary to tell all of the New Yorkers who they knew their bills were going to increase by approximately 60% that, hey, by the way, you may want to try to conserve energy this month. You may want to take some steps because your bill is going to increase. It just, all of this screams one thing, that we need to re-regulate our utility companies. It was a mistake in 1998 to deregulate them. Let's re-regulate them. We can do that this year. And then we can work towards the larger goal of getting us off of carbon, fossil fuels. We need to do a lot more. We need to be bolder. That is the two-pronged approach to try to stop this from happening again. And in the meantime, we need to put that $1 billion in the state budget to wipe out the arrears of New Yorkers, who are facing crippling utility bills.
Yeah, Zach, I just want to jump in after Bobby. Though it's a tough task to follow, I'm going to try here. I think that one thing to underline is that the scale of this crisis is such that people will be evicted from their homes because they do not have the money to pay for their bills, and they have to choose what they're going to pay for. And we as the state have abdicated responsibility in that right now we're leaving it up to Con Ed as to whether or not they have shutoffs, right? We're leaving it up to the whims of these energy companies as to what they're going to do to New Yorkers who can't afford these payments. And I think that, you had asked a question of how quickly do we respond to this? What do the next steps look like? What is the time frame? It has to be immediate. It has to be now. And, speaking to Bobby's point, right now, the governor's vision in terms of energy and in terms of environmental conservation, in many ways, is a repackaging of the Cuomo administration's vision. We're looking at the same bond act, though a little bit more funding. We're looking at the $500 million in offshore wind. These are good things, but we are facing a catastrophic crisis. It's almost like the regular things in life now are death, taxes, and another IPCC report telling us that the window for action is becoming smaller and smaller, and we have to act like it. And, I also just want to take issue respectfully with something that Senator Parker said about gas being a bridge fuel. I'm really disappointed to hear that kind of language because I represent Astoria. We have, we generate a significant amount of energy that is generated within New York City comes from my district in Long Island City. And I have meetings with all of these energy companies. And this is the language that I hear from them. They talk about,
what's the alternative?
We need to scale up the renewables right now.
But you can't do it fast enough. That's the reality of it. I mean, there's something called physics in the real world that we all deal with. Speak to the people at ACE, speak to the people who actually build it. Even if we bought every single asset, first of all, if you want to talk about even doing, public-owned renewables, there are 6 energy companies. Con Ed costs $50 billion. Let's say they all cost about the same. 50 times 6, you're talking about now $3 trillion. Where does the state come up with that money in the short term? And then if we owned it all, how do we get these all these electrons on online this quick? It just simply can't happen.
The first step is to pass the bill that you said that you co-wrote.
Okay, all right. So we pass it, and then what happens?
So can I jump in here, gentlemen?
How does that inherently? Tell me how that bill inherently produces clean energy electrons for the grid.
So first, I'm going to give the governor some credit here. I was mean to her before, but a plan that is in the works that is not a perfect plan, but will provide at least clean energy for New York, is the Lake Champlain Hudson Hydro-Quebec power line. Now, building new hydro is not a great thing because you destroy wetlands and rivers. However, that hydro in Quebec is already built and will produce clean energy to New York, about 20% of it. And that'll come online if the PSC approves it in the next 2 to 3 years. That gives us lead time. What I think Zohran is trying to say here is, look, we should not be building new carbon infrastructure. We should not be looking, we've got what's online right now. We need to systematically every 2 to 4 years take more carbon offline. And if we're able to do that, and supposedly if we're able to meet the goals of the CLCPA, which I think we should try to do, we should be able to take a large majority. Let me finish my point, Kevin. Let me finish my point
until you get stuff online.
Kevin,
like in other words, and then part of what you're understanding
can I finish
is that
my point?
people on fixed costs, people who are minorities, people who are low income are the ones who bear the brunt when you take things offline without a substitute. And right now, everybody's talking about taking stuff online, and nobody's talking about bringing things online.
So Kevin,
how do you bring more online? How do you bring more online?
Yeah, so Kevin, let me finish what I was saying. So first, let's do the math. You like to do the math? Let's do the math, okay? 20% from Hydro-Quebec. That's 1/5 of New York City's energy. Hydro-Quebec will provide 20% of New York City's energy in the next 2 to 3 years. Okay, we've got a wind farm that is supposed to power somewhere between 1 to 2 million homes in the New York City region prior to 2030, if we're going to meet the goals of the CLCPA. The PSC says 64% of the energy that's renewable energy that's supposed to be produced before 2030 is in their pipeline. Okay? Those are the facts from the governor's office. What I am saying is that we need to turbocharge that. We need to, in the next 8 years, try to exceed those goals. That's 8 years. Okay, when President Kennedy said we're going to put a man on the moon, so when President Kennedy, they hadn't put a rocket into space. I got it. We've got 8 years. You know what? And I think it's very important. And so, I think it's a little audacious to suggest that we shouldn't try to meet those goals.
Of course we should. All I'm asking is how. All I'm asking is how. That's what I'm asking. How?
So what, that's a pretty goddamn good plan from an assembly member, and it's our job to hold the feet to the fire to the governor, who, I'll be honest, sometimes is mendacious on this issue. And that's our job, is to call that out, because you're right. We do have ratepayers who are poor, who are on fixed incomes, who are seniors, who are being completely screwed by Con Ed. And it's ridiculous that the state of New York has to give $1 billion check to a for-profit company that pays the CEO $13 million a year. That's ridiculous.
Then what
you know what? If you want to sell blue jeans and make $13 million a year, go do it.
Bobby, Zach, let me make this last point. The two people you should call, is Tom DiNapoli and your friend Brad Lander, because they're the ones who own Con Ed. Right, the two largest investors in Con Ed is the New York State Common Retirement Fund and the City Retirement Fund. So call Brad and call Tom and complain to them.
And I think I've called when we've told the controller of the state and the city of New York to divest from all types of companies that we think no longer make sense for them to invest in.
So have they done it?
All right,
Have they done it?
We'll be able to do
Gentlemen,
that.
Have they done it?
I think we're gonna have to move on from this very spirited part of the discussion. I think Senator Mayer, you had some thoughts that you wanted to jump in with.
Well, I wanted to bring it back around to two things. One, the challenges our constituents face, which is what I am sort of focused on the ground. And I think most of us, yes, we need these big policy issues fought out and debated. But to Senator Parker's point, in my sort of lower tone way of saying the similar thing, our job right now is to help our constituents, to work with AARP, to deal with the people who are calling. I have people calling and saying, I can't go downstairs in my house because I have to keep it so cold that I can't live downstairs. I have to live in one room upstairs in order to keep my bill low enough so I don't have a shut off. So we got to focus on the here and now. One, the governor, whatever you say about her, the fact is she's a reasonable, thoughtful, empathetic person who we can work with, as opposed to our prior governor where we were in battle all the time. So let's take advantage of this moment instead of trashing her and say, let us work together to find a solution that helps our constituents now. Some of our constituents are interested in these big policy issues, and that is part of our job. I get that. But we got a short-term crisis right now. Our people have bills 100% bigger than they were last month. And what are we going to do about it? So we need in this short term to try to put a fix in the budget that puts the arrears there, protection against shutoffs, a better system of regulating future rate increases, and frankly, a more responsive agency that hears us when we calls and doesn't say, which what they said to me is, you know, it got cold in January. That is not an acceptable answer. So we got some short-term, people-specific job before us as legislators. And we got plenty of time, not plenty of time. We have time to argue the big things. Right now, these AARP members that are watching and the people that are calling each of our offices, I bet every one of us here has people calling in tears. They are so panicked about what they're going to do. So we got to figure it out in the short term and be pragmatic about however people don't like incrementalism. That's part of the job of being in the legislature. You take the bit you can get, you get as much as you get out of that bit, and you move along in the fight. So
Shelley,
I just want to drive back to the individual experience of our constituents, which is what one of the things we are charged to do.
Hey, Shelley, in your low tone manner, I will follow up to say that I wrote a bill last year that was submitted last year that actually would give permission to the PSC to actually create an arrears program using federal dollars that we believe exists already. But however, we should be very clear. They don't need my legislation, right? The TSC today could create that program, find the money in the feds, and start distributing it. And so I've tried to encourage in my conversations with both the governor's office and the chair of the PSC for them to do that. They have not quite gotten there yet. We should continue to push them to do that. But in absence of that, we should move my legislation in both houses and start, moving that in addition to whatever actions the state takes in the context of the budget.
See a few hands up. Assemblymember Mamdani, you've been waiting to say something for a minute or two.
Yeah, I just wanted to jump in and, I very much appreciate Senator Mayer's point. I think I do want to ground the policy conversation. The reason that I think it's of such importance is because we need to pay off these arrears now. And then we also need to ensure that these seniors are never in this place ever again. In many ways, it's kind of like the need to create ERAP and then also pass good cause evictions. We have to pass tenant protections to ensure that people are never on the precipice of eviction. And I think that it really is the same scale of urgency in this fight right now. What I see in my constituents who are calling me with those 200, 300% increases, who are saying that there's simply not enough money in the pocketbook to bridge this. They're asking me, one, how do I pay for this now? Two, is this going to happen next month? And three, how long is this going to happen for? And so I think that's where we have to have a vision that both encompasses the here and now, creates an arrears program that actually deals with what AARP members and all of our constituents are dealing with, and also ensure that Con Ed can never again hold our constituents over a barrel and say, you've got to pay this money or we're shutting everything off as soon as we change our company policy. And that is where the difficulty of this moment comes, where we're going to hear from so many people in the context of the crisis in Ukraine that the United States needs to build more gas, needs to frack more. But the issue is right now that we have to ensure that we are getting ourselves out of this situation and not also shooting ourselves in the foot for the next situation. And that's the contradiction that we have to disassemble. But I also
Assemblymember
Tapia.
What's the view from the Bronx, Assemblymember Tapia? Oh, I think you're on mute.
Yes.
There we go.
Okay, like I said at the beginning, I think, this is a catastrophic crisis that this pandemic has come on. But our constituents, our seniors are really suffering, and we cannot allow this to happen. And we need to solve the crisis that we have now, because they cannot cut it. I agree with Senator Mayor. But we have to figure out how that doesn't happen again. And we have to pass those laws, and we have to actually create more energy, renewable energy in the future, and do it quickly. But we have to act now, because this cannot happen. We need the $1 billion, but we also need the money from the federal government. And they have to be responsible for this too, because this was not a crisis that we created. And I just think, that my constituents, that 80% of them are the ones that are calling and coming here to my office, are because they owe electricity, and not only that, more than 300% in many cases has gone up, and they don't know how they're going to pay, because we are giving priority to the rent, which is also a big thing, but we are forgetting about those other the electric bill and the other bills that they have to pay. And I think that we have to make the governor accountable. We need that $1 billion right now, and then we need the solutions. We need the bills. But now, by April 1st, we need $1 billion to put it there, so we can make sure that these people are secure, that our constituents are secure, and they are going to be in their house, and then they're going to lose their electricity. So we just have to work on this, guys, and make sure that $1 billion in there, and we have to make the governor accountable. She cannot run away from it. I don't think so. I don't think we're going to allow her to run away from it. And that's, I think, that's an important thing now.
So time flies when we're having fun, right? And we only got a little bit of time left, but I do want to throw one last question out before we pivot to the end and David closes us out. We've talked so much about arrears, and rightfully so, and what to do about them in the state budget. But I do want to ask, is there anything in the mix of state budget negotiations that any of you see besides dealing directly with the arrears, and whether it should be 500 million, $1 billion, et cetera, that we ought to, that's worth mentioning here? Anything else in the budget?
Hey, Zach. Oh, I'm sorry.
No, please, Bill.
Thank you, Simon. Before you get to that, Zach, I just want one closing comment about the here and now. And I think both our Senate friends and Assembly people have said it, that the here and now is the budget. But if something is not done in the budget on arrears and other issues relating to that, it's a well-known fact that utilities terminate people in the spring. They usually don't terminate people in the winter. We have hundreds of thousands of people who are in arrears. If you look at the Con Ed service area, there's close to 400,000 people who are 60 days and behind on their bills now. And the moratorium is over. It was great that we had one, but it is over now. We do have some consumer protection statutes, but come spring, if something is not done in the budget with this problem, AARP's fear is that we're going to see wholesale terminations, not only in the city of New York, but all across the state. And that affects AARP members, that affects families, it affects everybody. So I know you got to move on, Zach, but we echo that the here and now is the budget to stop that storm that will come in April, May, and June. So, but I want to take your last question away.
I think you had your hand up too, Assembly Member.
Yeah, I was going to say, to answer your question, and something that I also saw some people raise in the chat, is this question of, what is the immediate vision? What is the priorities in the budget? And I think to build off of Bill's point, fundamentally arrears to ensure that nobody is kicked out of their, that everyone has heat, that everyone is allowed to continue to actually live in their homes in a habitable way. I think that we have to have policy that comes through by April 1st around the ability for New York State to build public renewables. And we've been having conversations with the governor on that, but that is part of the vision. We have to create a state competitor in a real way to these horrific energy companies. And we have not been able to do so through the legislature so far. We have the two bill co-writers. Senator Parker is chair of the Energy Committee. And we're trying to push the governor to include this in her vision for this budget. I think the other major thing we have to do is we have to consider these energy companies and these fossil fuel companies to be persona non grata in the way in which we engage with them. For too long, they have been a key part of formulating the vision for our state and even funding our campaigns. Senator Parker has received over $113,000 from energy companies over the time that he's been in office.
Assemblyman, check yourself, because what you have to understand is, first of all, you're trying to impugn my credibility. And let me have you understand something. I have served in this body for over 20 years. I'm the longest serving member on the Energy Committee, probably in the history of the state of New York. I have done more in the last 2 years than you have done in your whole life on the issue of environmental justice. So watch your tone, watch what you talk about. The reality is, if we want to have a policy disagreement, let's have the policy disagreement in which you're wrong about, and everybody agrees that you're wrong about, but you're certainly not going to get on here and then try to impugn my character and make some suggestion that a campaign contribution has stopped me from passing legislation. I helped negotiate the CLCPA. The CCIA is my bill. The bill that you're talking about, that you're so upset about public power, is my bill. The Assembly hasn't passed it. Are you saying anything about Bobby and about who he got money from? I'll tell you what, the day after Bobby passes the bill, I will pass the bill the day after Bobby passes it. So pass it in the Assembly, and you have my public assurance that I will pass it the very next day.
All right.
So pass it in the Assembly first. But what you're not going to do is come on here and let me say this. I know you're new, but it's not the kind of thing that colleagues do. And if you have something to say to me about you thinking about how I operate, you should say it to me when you see me in the legislature. But certainly you shouldn't be a Zoom tough guy and try to think that you're going to impugn my character. Because the reality, I've been doing this a very, very, very long time at the highest level. Right? The Environmental Justice Review Panel, that was my legislation. And I wrote it 10 years before the CLCPA got passed. Right? And so let's back up a little bit on who you're talking to. Don't come for me unless I call for you.
So Senator Parker and I represent many similar communities. And first, I just want to make it very clear, we partner on all sorts of things very, very well. And Senator Parker, you know that you and I are friends and have worked very, very well together. Let me talk about something just very practical here for seniors. We have the Public Utility Law Project that can get folks help if they are in arrears. And so if right now you are struggling, you can reach out to them. They are a wonderful organization. You can, of course, reach out to all of our offices as well to be hooked up with those folks. We do desperately need to pass that $1 billion in the budget to help folks with arrears. And then what we do need to do is we need to find a new way forward. I fundamentally believe that we need to re-regulate our energy markets. The New York Power Authority has stellar green bond ratings that can help us build renewable energy. We need to work towards a renewable future. We need the governor to take bold action. We do need to pass the Build Public Renewables Act. And the reason we need to pass that is because we need to put the weight and the heft of the state of New York. The state of New York has an economy almost as large as the country of Russia that is terrorizing the world right now. The state of New York has over 20 million people. The state of New York can be a large actor in helping us meet our renewable energy goals. And the reason why we want to do that in the next 10 years is not because it's feel good or goo-goo. It's because it will help keep rates down. The problem with the energy markets, and it's going to become a problem more and more, is that the energy that we have to use to heat our homes and to electrify our homes is going to become more and more fraught over the next decades. We don't want to be on the whims. You know, we had President Biden called Saudi Arabia and the UAE to have help with the issues going on in Russia and Ukraine. They wouldn't take his call unless they agreed to support the bombing of Yemen. We don't want to be at the whims of folks like that who think that it's okay to coerce us due to their fossil fuel resources. We want to be energy independent as a nation. It makes us stronger. It makes us healthier. And we can do that. And New York should be a leader. New York was a leader in building out the New Deal. The New York Power Authority came out of FDR when he was governor in this state. We can do that again. We can help lead this nation and we can show the path. It's not going to happen overnight. Senator Parker is correct with that. But we can slowly chip away at it over the next 8 to 10 years. And if we do that, we can have a very different outlook. And I think we can have a much more sane energy policy.
So with that, after a very spirited discussion, no denying that, we're going to have to close things out, but not before a final word from David McNally. You know, I think Assemblymember Carroll really said it all right there. You know, there's a lot of energy in New York to do something about these rising energy prices, utility arrears, so much more. What are your final thoughts? Uh-oh, we got another mute button. There we go.
I want to thank you, Zach, and City and State, as well as the legislators, Assembly members Parker and Mayor, I'm sorry, Senators Parker and Mayor, and Assembly members Carroll, Mamdani, and Tapia. Utility costs are always a concern for our members. I've been at AARP 27 years, and I don't think I've ever heard or seen from our members their concerns like we have now. This is a completely different place. And I think everybody knows that who's on the call today, and that's why we're on the call today. We had a utility arrears problem before COVID, and now we definitely have an arrears crisis. There's just no denying it. I have on my notes that 1.2 million households are behind on their electric gas bills. I think I heard the Assemblywoman actually say 1.3 million. Regardless of how many it is over $1.7 billion people are facing in arrears, and that doesn't even count those struggling with water, high-speed internet access, and phone bills. So, and just this week, Newsday reported the home heating oil hit an all-time high of $5.25 a gallon. And on Long Island, that's how 40% of the homes on Long Island heat their homes. So then you got Con Ed. It's almost in a surreal world where they think now is the time they should have an 18% electric increase for millions of New Yorkers in the 5 boroughs in Westchester. I mean, it just all seems to be coming to a head. And without action, more New Yorkers are going to fall further behind on their bills, and many will never recover. More than 1 million homes, I think Bill said, more than 1 million homes face the threat of shutoffs. The governor and the legislature need to step up and address the crisis. And the state has the federal money to do it, so they should use it and get it done. We are encouraged by reports that the Assembly One-House budget bill will include some funding to address the arrears issue. We're hoping to see similar reports from the state Senate when their One-House comes out. But we do have getting back to what Senator Mayer said about the here and now, we have an immediate 4-step plan. One is to use that $1.25 billion in American Recovery Funds to help with the arrears issue. The other is to pass a bill that would reallocate $200 million in sales tax to help for non-energy utilities, for the low and fixed income who are facing arrears on non-utilities, like I mentioned before, phone, internet access, and so forth, water. And then 3, direct the PSC to have a workable utility arrears resolution program. We could spend a whole nother hour talking about what the PSC needs to be doing better. And here's one of them. And finally, we need to pass Senator Parker's bill to extend the moratorium through June 30th. So those 4 points we think can be done right away and will go a long way toward addressing and fixing the crisis we're in right now. And with that said, I just want to thank you again and all the legislators for their participation.
Thanks so much, David. An hour on PSC issues, I think we would all be for that. We got some policy nerds here for sure. Thank you all to everyone on our panel. Again, it was a very spirited discussion, and that's because people care about these things and they have real thoughts and opinions. And I'm glad you shared it all with us here because, if nobody cared, then, good things aren't going to happen, right? And with that closes out this edition of our State Legislative Forum. I would like to thank the AARP for partnering with us to make it happen, our great events team, and everyone else at City and State that helped us do this. I'm Zach Williams, Senior State Politics Reporter at City and State. Thank you all to our great audience. Catch you next time.